You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
We like to see a substantive review of changes. Are the materials on here the correct quantities? Is the labor quantities correct? Do we have too many journeymen and foremen, not enough apprentices to reflect reality? Are markups correct, or are they overstated? This is what we mean by a substantive review. What we saw was that this kind of review was not taking place.
The information delivered last week after a special audit of the construction progress and the cost of Paul Brown Stadium was enough to make powerful politicians literally shake. Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. The fight to get the voters to approve a sales tax levy frayed the community's nerves. The fight over where to put two new stadiums drove longtime allies into warring camps. But all that should be fading into the fuzzy past by now. Construction crews have taken an erector set of 7,000 tons of steel beams and created the skeleton that then poured millions of pounds of concrete so that Paul Brown Stadium has quickly become an emerging reality. Now, just 6 months before the Bengals received the first kickoff from their first preseason opponent, this should be the time to start feeling good about things. But with the PricewaterhouseCoopers delivering its special audit report last Monday, this project has once again become a point of division and embarrassment. The numbers swim, but here's a quick summary. The original guaranteed maximum price, the GMP, set in December 1997 was $287 million for construction. This week, the commissioners added $14.3 million. Estimates range up to another $30.7 million in the future having to be added for a total of about $45 million of overrun. To talk about this, I am joined this morning by Bob Bedinghaus, the Hamilton County Commissioner and the person who's been point on this from the beginning. Bob, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Glad to be back here, Dan.
Bob, what's guaranteed about the guaranteed maximum price, the GMP?
Let me get to that in a second. I just want to set the tone for what we need to accomplish in this community.
Okay.
And our role as county commissioners, and specifically my role as the person who's been out front on this issue from the very beginning, in the good times and in the bad times, I view my role as really twofold. First of all, we are going to do what we need to do to take control of this project. We have adopted all of the Pricewaterhouse reports.
Okay.
We're bringing on the additional staff we need to bring on. There will be plenty of time to place blame, and we will hold people accountable for those people that need to be accountable. In addition to that, though, there's a bigger picture here, and we need to make sure that this community every once in a while is able to stick its head up above the trees and understand exactly what it is that's on our horizon, and it is the renaissance of the riverfront. Having said that, let me get right to your question because I don't want to avoid questions.
Because I wasn't going to let you go much further.
I
Okay,
wouldn't
ahead.
expect you to. I wouldn't expect you to. When we started out on this project, we dealt with it in some cases just like all the other projects we did in county government. When we renovated the Alms and Depke building, when we purchased the old Board of Education building, the Ohio National building, and we went to our construction managers and we said, all right, give us a guaranteed maximum price for this project. We also have in our staff
Did that work?
And that worked in every one of those projects.
Go ahead.
In every one of those projects. We also have a pretty talented group of people in our Public Works Department that oversaw those projects.
Okay.
When we got to stadiums, we realized, first of all, we have nowhere near the expertise to build a stadium.
When did you realize that?
At the very beginning of the project.
All right.
And at that point, we went out and hired construction managers and architects and engineers just like every other project, and a project manager whose role and responsibility was to serve in the capacity that our staff served in those other jobs. And this was a firm who did other stadiums in other cities.
All right.
The guaranteed maximum price was set on a scope of work that the design team put together. Quite honestly, what has happened is the design that was put together by the architect early on was not fully developed. And it is that additional scope of work that we're talking about.
Right, I know that. And I will get to that in a minute. But what's guaranteed about the guaranteed maximum price of 1997? I mean, the only thing that's guaranteed is we're going to have to pay more, right?
We are going to end up paying more. There's no question about that. And we're going to hold the people accountable that have caused us to go above
Well,
that.
what does that mean?
Guaranteed,
in the sense that they will have to, you'll be able to recover some of those funds?
If you go to the PricewaterhouseCoopers report,
Right.
and where they recommended that we increase the budget by $14.3 million, another one of their recommendations was that there is a claim out there for about $12 million at this point.
And I didn't try to get into all of those
Right.
figures. Those were better on print.
Kind of errors and omissions
But
type of coverage.
you will go after that?
And we will go after that.
Okay, so...
But it's important to remember, the goal here is to open the stadium and do it with the best value to the taxpayers. The time to collect on that money will come, but the time to complete the project is now.
Very quickly, when all is said and done on Paul Brown Stadium by itself, what's going to be the overage over $287 million?
Right now, the construction manager is estimating that number to be $44 million.
Yeah, but what are you saying it's going to be?
Well, I'm telling you that we're going to have the people in place that are going to hold the construction manager and architect's feet to the
Right.
fire. I can't give you an exact number right now, Dan, and I don't think any construction
More or
project
less than
at this
44?
point. Oh, I think it's going to be a little less than 44.
Okay, all right, we'll remember that.
Get
Now,
that on tape.
Darn right.
All right.
One of the things that I think is the problem is I wasn't at the meeting on Monday, but I listened to a complete videotape of it. What Price Waterhouse Coopers kept coming back to was there was no continuing audit process. In talking to some construction folks in calls I've made, I said, well, gee, why wasn't that put in? And I was told the question is not why wasn't it put in, but why was it taken out? That's sort of part of a boilerplate construction contract on something this big, that boilerplate contracts have a construction audit function, and somebody must have made the decision we don't need that. Is that true? And if so, who made that decision?
Well, I don't know whether you can refer to any of these contracts as boilerplate contracts because there's so few and far between these projects themselves.
Well, big projects.
In hindsight, without a doubt, a construction auditor should have been involved in this project from the very beginning.
Did somebody say that to you early on? Did somebody say?
I don't remember.
Do you remember a decision about not including it?
No, I don't. But I can tell you that as we went through this process, the professionals that we employ in county government, Dave Krings being our county administrator, his approach to this was, gentlemen, we have professional construction managers whose job it is to bring this in on time, on budget. We have professional architects and engineers whose job it is to bring it on time and on budget. And we have hired the necessary resources through the project manager to do that. And in county government, if we make an error by creating too little bureaucracy from time to time, then that may be a valid criticism. But Dave Krings' approach to this was he didn't think at that point that we needed another additional set of eyes checking people who were checking people who were doing things.
Okay.
But
So
it
there
was
a decision.
But there is no question that was a mistake, and I want to
Okay.
be very clear about
Somehow Krings was involved in that. All right.
We were all
and
involved
you were all
in that.
involved,
We were
but
all
that
involved
was
in
the
that.
advice
Nobody-
you were getting.
nobody is,
One of the issues here about the overages is the process that's being used, design build. And if I understand this correctly, and I've been involved in some other construction projects as a sub, when you're on a tight time schedule, this is for fast track development. And rather than developing all the details and then putting things out on bid, you get the concept, based on the project manager and construction manager's experience, you send those out for bid. And then hopefully you can refine it, but you have a contingency for overages in that 10% or whatever. What Coopers is saying, Price Waterhouse is saying, is that those early drawings were totally out of line. They were too weak to be going to the street, as they put it, for bid. Was that a mistake to go that way? Was there a false timeline put on this and we got ourselves in trouble because we just asked too much of the designers and the architects?
I don't want to get into whether we've asked too much of the designers or architects yet. I'll let the attorneys and lawyers worry about that later on. I do want to point out that this project has been on a tight timeline from the very beginning.
Incredibly tight.
And the very beginning was even before Hamilton County government got involved in this. You can go back to 1994 when the city of Cincinnati signed a lawsuit settlement with the Cincinnati Bengals that agreed in 1994 that the Bengals would have a new facility in the year 2000. Excuse me. They didn't know how they were going to pay for it. They didn't know how they were going to do it. We came on the scene in 1996, and there has been deadline after deadline after deadline that we've gone up to the 12th hour, and in one case, if you even remember,
we
went to the
back.
13th hour and we
Yes.
turned the clock back.
Yes.
So it should be no surprise to anybody that this thing has been on a tight timeline.
And that deadline was set back in 94.
In 94.
Okay.
And that has
and
caused...
did you ever ask the Bengals to lengthen that deadline?
Sure.
To make life easier?
Absolutely.
And they said?
No.
Okay, well that's clear on that. NBBJ, we're taping this on Friday morning. There's an article in the Cincinnati Enquirer this morning that says NBBJ has a history of going over budget. They cite Seattle and the stadium out in Seattle. Is that true? And did you know that? And how much did you research NBBJ and their ability to deliver on time at budget?
The Safeco project occurred after we hired NBBJ. They were in the midst of that, and the amount of the overruns in Seattle were not were not apparent
at that point.
At that point.
How about other places? NBBJ, if I'm not mistaken, is the architect on the new Cintas Center for Xavier. Is that
Actually,
correct?
I believe they're no longer the architect on the Cintas Center.
Did you talk to Xavier, though, at that time?
And Xavier hired NBBJ after we hired them, I believe. You'd have to go back and look at that. I'm not quite sure of that.
Okay.
But
I'm not sure either.
It wasn't, I mean, the problems they ran into there were not apparent as well. I can say NBBJ is teamed with a local firm, Glazer & Associates, who has done, Glazer & Associates has done a very good job for us. Now, NBBJ has put together an incredible design. If anything, they perhaps fall a little short in the delivery of the construction drawings. It turns out that, they've had some problems in that area and other places as well. But I'm not going to lay all of the fault here at the feet of the architects.
No, I'm not either. I'm saying who knew it. Did you do due diligence? Did you pursue due diligence in checking out NBBJ's record before you signed the contract?
We had a competitive process that brought about a request for proposals where we reviewed at least 3 internationally acclaimed architects: NBBJ, HOK, who is doing the Red Stadium, and a company called Ellerby Beckett. What we found is that within each of these firms, they had the expertise that have been involved in major stadium construction projects in the past. In none of those cases, and we checked out references with all of them, were there significant problems identified with any of these firms. Since then, there's been some problems, and quite honestly, on every one of these stadium projects, these similar kind of problems seem to crop up.
Let me ask this question to clarify. You and I talked about this on the phone when we first talked on Tuesday. There was a overreach. There's always a contingency line in a big budget like this, 10%. You had that?
We had a contingency budget in this
and
this
what
project.
we're talking about now is over that contingency budget.
That is correct.
All right. Okay, so we've blown the contingency budget, and now we're going beyond.
Actually, I think technically there's still some money within the contingency budget, but we're talking nickels and dimes here.
Okay. On Monday, when you heard the report, my impression is you did not have that report until you got the person from Price Waterhouse giving you the report. You hadn't seen it beforehand?
No, sir, and that was exactly the way we wanted it. We didn't want to put a special spin on this audit as it came out. One thing we're proud of in county government is unlike our friends in Cleveland who hid their cost overruns until after the stadium opened, we want to make sure that the public understands exactly what it is that we're doing as we move forward. It was in the fall of last year when Dave Krings and our county staff started to sense that there might be a problem. At that point, they came to the commissioners and said, look, we think we need to bring in an auditor to look at this. And we said, that's fine.
And
but
when was that? Back in October?
That was back in October of last year.
October, November, December, January, February, 4.5 months?
That's a lot of work. I mean,
I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not saying Price Waterhouse, but you had a suspicion something was wrong. Was there anything you could have done before you got this report to sort of stem the tide?
During that 4.5 months, we put additional resources from the county into the project and did everything we could to make sure that we were paying attention in an extra fashion to what was going on. Now, what we said to PricewaterhouseCoopers was, give us the report. We want the unvarnished truth of what's going on this project, and we want you to deliver it to us in a public fashion. Now, after the meeting, I can tell you, I pulled them aside and I asked them 2 very important questions.
Okay.
Did you sense that there was any corruption or fraud that was endemic in this project with the construction manager or anybody else? And they said no. I took that one step further and said, do you sense that there's any corruption or fraud within our staff? And their answer was no. So, what we have here are errors of
judgment,
of judgment, perhaps.
Well, let's get to that, because I'm aware of how much time how we're quickly running out of time. You earlier talked about what David Krings, the county administrator, had recommended to you. We're talking about, whether we were beyond the scope of doing this size project, et cetera, et cetera. David Krings, that the voters will decide about you this fall. The voters will decide about John Dallin. The voters will decide 2 years from now about Tom Nyer. That's the voters' decision. What about Dave Krings? Is his head on the line? Should his head be on the line?
No. One thing that we are not going to do in county government is look for a scapegoat. There's enough blame to go around, and I think, quite honestly, the county commissioners deserve some of that blame. And we're going to shoulder that responsibility. And we're not going to look for, lesser politicians might say, all right, we're going to fire Dave Krings because you know what? That's going to make us look better. That's not the way we're going to go about business. We're going to make sure we grab control of this project. We're going to hold people accountable for what they need to do for this community, and we're going to get the job done.
I've got less than 30 seconds. Tough question. If, in the next couple of months, the Republican Party decides that this is such a mess that you've become a liability, and they come to you and say, Bob, we want you to take a bullet for the party and step aside for this fall, would you do it?
Well, look, the Republican Party is fully supportive of my campaign, and I think it's
definitely been, but will.
And I think it's more important for this community that we show that there are political leaders who can take political risks and deliver projects. And I think that if what we find is that when things get a little tough, we all of a sudden abandon the responsibilities that we have taken on, we'll never get another political leader in this community to stand up and make a tough call. So I'm dedicating, as hard as I work to get this tax passed to begin with, I'm going to work to make sure this thing comes in on time and for the best value of the taxpayers. And I think that will serve not just the political future of this community, but for generations to come, a great riverfront.
Bob, thanks for coming, and I've got a feeling we're going to keep talking about this until November.
That's great.
You think so? Okay, we're going to stay tuned, because after the break, we're going to come back and meet one of the great men of the century, Ted Berry. Welcome back. Theodore Berry is most often identified as Cincinnati's first African-American mayor. Although correct, that designation totally misses the true greatness of this man. Here's a brief background.
Born in 1905, Ted Berry is a protege of Cincinnati's great black educator, Jenny Porter. In 1924, Berry graduated from Woodward High School, becoming the city's first African-American valedictorian. After earning college and law degrees from UC, Berry became the second president of the local NAACP, where in the 1930s he led the fight against school segregation.
Where there was an increasing number of black students, no black teachers, we were pressing with the Board of Education for a more open policy with reference to the elimination of the dual list of teachers, black teachers in one list and white teachers in another.
Berry went on to serve as the county's first black assistant prosecutor, then in 1949 to a seat on the city council as a charterite. In the 1960s, he went to Washington to join the war on poverty under President Lyndon Johnson, and then returned to Cincinnati, becoming its first black mayor in 1972.
It's really a shame that he only became mayor, because Ted Berry was the caliber person that could have been a presidential candidate, but the times were not right.
On Saturday night, Applause Magazine will host its annual Image Makers Awards. Mr. Berry will be honored as the person of the century. To talk about Mr. Berry as a public servant, a leader, and as a private person, I am joined this morning by his son, Ted Berry Jr., a lawyer here in Cincinnati. Mr. Berry, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Your father has been a hero of mine for a long, long time, and somebody who's been very gracious to me over the last 22 years, and I really appreciate it. And I'm glad to see he'll be honored again. This is not the first time. First off, how is he? How is your father, and how's your mother?
Well, he's 94 years old. He's in fair health.
Mm-hmm.
As you get older, 94, your body tends to break down a little bit. Mentally, he's very good. Physically, he's a little frail. Mm-hmm. He is aware of this award this weekend. He will not be able to attend, but we are going to show him the videotape, and he is aware of the award, and he's very happy to be recognized like that.
You know, we can talk about all those offices and all those things, and you're a lawyer.
Yes.
And he was a lawyer, and the law has been very important to him over the years. And you brought me something this morning, and which I think says something about where your father was ahead of the curve. Tell us about this. What is this?
Well, that's a 1940 opinion from the Ohio Supreme Court, Lewis versus the Board of Education of Wilmington. It was a school desegregation case that my father, Bill McLean, his former law partner, and Thurgood Marshall tried in Wilmington in 1939, where little black kids had to walk past 2 elementary schools, all white, segregated, to go to a little shanty, a shack, way across town. They made the argument that separate but equal was unconstitutional. They argued it in the trial court. It went to the appellate court. They affirmed the lower court, saying that separate but equal was constitutional. Then they took it all the way up to the Ohio Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in 1940 published that opinion, basically stating separate but equal was constitutional and was permissible to segregate these children. Those are the same arguments that Thurgood Marshall made in federal court 14 years later that ultimately prevailed in Brown versus the Board of Education. So they were making those same type of arguments and those same type of fights in state court 14 years before they ultimately prevailed in federal court.
You know, I think from a historian's point of view, what's interesting about that is history books tend to only look at the big thing that breaks through, you know, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. And from students, they think, oh, it just came out of nowhere. And they forget or they may know Thurgood Marshall's name, but they forget that there are hundreds and thousands of people who have worked on this project, process for years, decades before that, and people like your father. One of the things that, I know this is a hard question, but if you can say there is one thing that's most important that your father intentionally tried to communicate to you, what was it?
Fairness. Look out for those who are less fortunate. Look out for those, or be compassionate towards those who are born in disadvantaged circumstances, whether it be race, socioeconomics, things of that nature. Always don't forget where you come from, and look out for those less fortunate than you. Help those, give them a hand out instead of a hand, give them a hand up instead of a hand out. That's basically what he's conveyed to me throughout my life.
You know, he's connected in such an intricate way with another great name that lots of people know, Jenny Porter, who had very different ideas. I mean, Jenny Porter accepted Booker T. Washington's sort of segregationist approach. Your father was NAACP, integrationist approach. But obviously, even though they disagreed, they had an incredible relationship. Who were his heroes?
Jenny Porter, for one.
Even though he disagreed. And I think that's something we need to point out.
She was his school teacher.
Right.
She was one of his mentors. She encouraged him. She pushed him. You know, as a youth, you need encouragement. You need someone to look up to, someone to encourage you and cultivate you. He admired her. He always speaks very highly of her. And even though they had their disagreements in terms of vision, he always recognized her as one of his mentors.
And I have less than 30 seconds. Okay. Anybody else that? W.E.B. Du Bois, who was very instrumental in the Niagara movement, which started the NAACP. He looked up to him and was very respectful of him. Okay, I want to get out right now because I want people to hear your father for a little bit. Thank you for being here. Convey my appreciation and congratulations to him. And he thanks you for the recognition. Thank you. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. We end this morning with some final thoughts from Mr. Berry. Let me set the scene. In 1924, the Woodward High School faculty named him valedictorian, the first time a black student had been so honored. White classmates protested the honor, in part because the class orator traditionally processed down the music hall aisle with the class vice president, a white girl that year. A threatened boycott was averted when the administration decided that Mr. Berry would process alone behind the vice president. Several years ago, I returned to Music Hall with Mr. Berry. With a sense of pride and dignity, Mr. Berry once again ascended to the hall's stage and again, without a note, delivered his entire 1924 speech, The Chaos Beyond. The way Mr. Berry interprets that whole experience for himself, in my mind, sums up the way he has come to think about how his life has been lived as a whole.
As I left the hall, what the other children, graduates, were going to do, I don't know. There was no after party. As I walked across down Elm Street to 12th Street, as I left Music Hall, there was a man, a colored man, waiting outside. He was a chauffeur for some parties. And he spoke to me and he said, I heard there was a colored boy give one of the speeches in there. How did he do? And I said, I think he did pretty well.